last week we read about King David's census that he does, which is a major thing in both the book of Chronicles and the book of and I showed you back in the book of Samuel. The book of Samuel ends with this. This is the final story in the book of Samuel. It kind of really there's nothing more after this story because at least the way the we some it's sometimes called the primary history, the history that goes through Judges, Samuel, and Kings. That history kind of there's a break here with what King David does here, which again, at the very least, I mean, we can't speculate exactly why it is, but the writer, the way that the book of Samuel was organized, and remember, there's two books of Samuel, but in the Hebrew Bible originally there was only one book of Samuel. The authors and editors of Samuel decided that that was it. We're not going to talk about King David really anymore because the book of Kings opens with the building of the temple and King David taking his last acts as king and basically turning over power to Solomon. That's kind of where that's kind of where we left it, and in Chronicles, and let me just Glorian. When we think about the similarities between the books, we talked about in previous classes, we talked about what's in some of the books and what's not in some of the books. I think the thing to take away from last week and this week is that for us, the like I said, I'm gonna when we get into this next part of Chronicles, when we get into Second Chronicles, we'll look at it a little bit. We'll look at it about a little bit in a comparative way. But this book of the book of Samuel ends with this, and then kind of the First Chronicles ends with this story, and then the building of the temple, which is what we're going to read today. And so I guess what I'm saying is that it's what we're seeing here is not just what's in and what's out of the book, but how the books were kind of completed or organized. The organization of the books is what's at stake here. It's not just like what's in and what's out, but like how are you gonna frame them? And the book of Samuel ends with this. And again, originally Chronicles, like Samuel in the Hebrew Bible, is only one book. But the Christian editors, I guess, who split this into two books, thought this was a good place to break it because it's roughly where the book of Samuel ends, and then the book of Kings takes over. So it's almost like, think about it this way. First Chronicles is both books of Samuel, and Second Chronicles picks up at Kings, roughly. I mean, that's the easy way to look at it. If somebody said, well, what do you know about Chronicles? Well, the way that Christians kind of organized it, First Chronicles would cover the first two books of Samuel, roughly. I mean, the book of Samuel was the first book, the book of Samuel, and then Second Chronicles is really kind of the book of Kings. So, and again, with a lot of stuff not in one, and also some slight changes in them. So that's kind of where we left off, which was the census, which Chronicles says that Satan instigated, which is not what the book of Samuel says. This book of Samuel does not insert Satan in that. It basically says that God kind of made David make a mistake. We can read into it. It's obviously important that the author of Chronicles doesn't want to make it God's responsibility that David makes this mistake. So that's a theological difference, and it is. And it's obviously also a theological difference that Satan has any role at all, which kind of tells us that the book of Chronicles was written considerably later than the book of Samuel, because if an author is going to feel comfortable saying the word Satan in that, there's a later influence. And we believe that influence was particularly the Persian influence, the Zoroastrian influence. Because remember, the Persians were Zoroastrian peoples primarily. That was the main religion of the Persian Empire. If Chronicles is written during the time when the Jews were returned back to Israel with the Persian patronage, we're assuming something, which I think is pretty fair, which is that by that point we had taken on some Persian influence. And one of the Persian influences was this idea of a dualistic situation, right? Which is you have a light side and a dark side. Yeah, a light side and a dark side. Sounds a lot like the Force, right? Which is where that mythology came from. Zoroastrianism is deeply borrowed from Zoroastrian theology and mythology. And in Zoroastrianism, you have these ideas of dark forces that are forces that we have to be careful of. And so, it makes sense that a Jew living in under a Persian influence can start talking about Satan in a way that sounds a lot like, a dark side, a dark force. Again, we have to assume that the author of Chronicles did not assume that we were going to read the book of Samuel side by side like we are today. So, it also, again, theologically makes it less problematic that God got David in trouble. And of course, this is in trouble because David had done something that provoked a horrible plague that killed thousands of people. By the way, the book of Chronicles will not say that's his only mistake. And of course, neither did the book of Samuel, which tells us of what he did to Uriah the Hittite in stealing his wife Bathsheba. All right. So let's take on now in chapter 22, the building of the temple. Now, we're going to read some narrative today, but we're also going to be reading a long list of people. Again, one of those long priestly lists of who does what. Because the author of Chronicles is not only concerned with what happened, but who's in charge. Because he's one of those guys who's in charge. If it is as we assume Ezra, then the people who we've already encountered in the book of Ezra and Nehemiah, those people were very concerned with who was in charge, meaning the priests and their entourage. All right, so let's take a look at this, which again, interesting narrative, and then also some probably a little less interesting lists of names. But we'll get to the narrative first. Here we go, Rosemary.
David said, "Here will be the house of the Lord, and here the altar of burnt offerings for Israel." David gave orders to assemble the aliens living in the land of Israel and assigned them to be hewers, to quarry and dress stones for building the house of God.
So that's an interesting idea, which is that there were people living in the land of Israel who were not residents, and they were given responsibilities of helping to build the temple. Now, you might wonder, well, wouldn't anybody want to help build a temple? This definitely seems to be a little bit of a responsibility where maybe you're not getting paid to do some of this work. Just keep in mind, that's not uncommon in the ancient world. The Egyptians were notorious at making people do building, construction, especially of temples and pyramids and the like, not without getting paid. Well, so John asks who fed them. The assumption based on what we know about the Egyptians is that the government provides you food in kind of a living area where you can put up your tent and that kind of thing while you're doing the work. But remember, this isn't just building it, it's also getting the stones out of the ground. It's mining it, it's quarrying. So it's not just they were sitting at the temple, in Jerusalem, but they were out in the quarries also getting the stones ready. So,
Much iron for nails for the doors of the gates and for clasps did David lay aside, and so much copper it could not be weighed, and cedar logs without number. For the Sidonians and the Tyrians brought many cedar logs to David. For David thought, my son Solomon is an untried youth, and the house to be built for the Lord is to be made exceedingly great to win fame and glory throughout all the lands. Let me then lay aside material for him. So David laid aside much material before he died.
yes. And this is pretty important because this is not recounted in the book of Samuel. This idea that David had a lot to do with the construction isn't really, we don't get that in the book of Samuel. Which, again, I don't want to say that's Solomon's version because, I mean, it probably was written during Solomon's time. This is written several hundred years later. So there's at least other accounts and other records, of this, which says that maybe David did a lot of the prep work for this. It's definitely giving him credit for it. Which kind of makes sense because if the book of Samuel is written during Solomon's lifetime, then maybe Solomon didn't want to give his dad credit. It's not unheard of that children sometimes don't give their parents credit. But that later generations, like maybe the great, great, great grandkids, do. So that's probably what happened. I mean, that's what we think happened here, which is that we have to get to the book of Chronicles to hear, yeah, actually David did a lot of it. And that line there is a little bit of a dig at Solomon, right? It's David saying, I yeah, I'm not so sure about him. He's kind of inexperienced and young. So that's also here. In the book of Chronicles, there is no discussion about how Solomon became king. In the book of Samuel and the book of Kings, it is very important how Solomon became king. And you can make the argument that's because Solomon, had to authorize it. On the other hand, if Solomon authorized it, it also doesn't make Solomon look, well, let's put it this way. The version of the story that we have, just to remind you, of Bathsheba, Solomon's mother, and the prophet Nathan maneuvering to get David to make Solomon king is, it's not, it doesn't make Bathsheba and Solomon look perfect. Let's put it that way. It's a very, I think, a very probably accurate accounting of what happened, but it really shows the politics that went into in the family politics that went into making Solomon king. We don't have that in Chronicles. It's just skipped. It's just not there. All of a sudden, Solomon is going to be king. David knows he's going to be king, and he's like prepping him, which again, he seems like, maybe he doesn't have full confidence in Solomon's abilities yet. Okay.
Then he summoned his son Solomon and charged him with building the house for the Lord God of Israel. David said to Solomon, my son, I wanted to build a house for the name of the Lord my God, but the word of the Lord came to me, saying, you have shed much blood and fought great battles. You shall not build a house for my name, for you have shed much blood on the earth in my sight. But you will have a son who will be a man at rest, for I will give him rest from all his enemies on all sides. Solomon will be his name, and I shall confer peace and quiet on Israel in his time.
And you can see the word Shlomo is peace. So his name is Shalom Shlomo from Shalom, right? And Sheket, quiet, Sheket. So, yeah, David, you don't get to be the guy who builds my temple because you have too much blood on your hands, which is interesting because the blood on his hands is not the blood of the people in his own family that he's responsible for killing, like Absalom. which he didn't kill, but his brother, his cousin Yoav killed him. Absalom killed his brother Amnon. All that other blood in the family isn't discussed here. It's the blood that he killed of other people that makes you not legitimate, which is kind of weird because it seems like David does that for the best, for the betterment of the community. It's not his fault that he had to fight a lot of battles, but at least according to Chronicles, that's why he's not able to. God says it's not because of Bathsheba and Uriah. That could be one reason. It's not because of your family dysfunction that you either didn't do a very good job of parenting or you let things get out of control, um, or you're just really unlucky. But not because of that, but because you killed too many other people, which from other nations. Yeah. No, it's interesting. Yeah, it says the word of the Lord. The word of the Lord is an interesting word, right? Because it says Devar Adonai. Where does the word of the Lord usually come from? Mike, where does it usually come from? Where does the word of the Lord usually come from?
Prophets.
Yeah, a prophet. So we know that Nathan, the prophet, is the one who's usually speaking on behalf of God to David, right? So he's the one who told him Solomon's going to be king. He's the one who says, you screwed up, by the way, back when Solomon was born, Bathsheba. He's the one who is, he remember, he wasn't the first son, Solomon. The first son was a stillborn son that David and Bathsheba had. The baby that she was carrying from David when she was still married, um, to Uriah. So yeah, he's getting the word of the Lord, assumedly from the prophets, from God. We do know that he saw the angel when he sees the angel, leading, kind of throwing the plague out on everybody. He sees the angel, so he does see some manifestation of God. But it's an interesting question again, John, is that he doesn't talk to God like Moses does, for sure. You know, the rabbis imagine that he's inspired by God because he wrote the Psalms, which he must have gotten those from God. But he doesn't talk directly to God, and he has his prophet Nathan. He's not his only prophet, but that's one of the prophets. So Solomon, he gets priest, but it's not over.
He will build a house for my name. He shall be a son to me, and I to him a father. And I will establish his throne of kingship over Israel forever.
Which is really nice. Which again, he's basically saying Solomon's the one who the kingship, the dynasty is going to be through. So this is all God saying, and he says, he'll be like my son. He'll be like my son. Yeah, right. So it's not impossible for God to say to somebody, "I'm your father." Not literally your father. David's his father, but you will be a son to me, right? So obviously, I'm telling you this because it's a major difference of idea of different faiths, right? Can God have a son? Well, it doesn't say he's literally his son. We know who his father is, but he's my son. When it's capital M, that means God, right? So, my name, right? He's building it for my name. So, this is all the word of God. That's all the message. And David's saying that. But now David goes back to speaking on his behalf.
Now, my son, may the Lord be with you, and may you succeed in building the house of the Lord your God, as he promised you would. Only let God give you sense and understanding, and put you in charge of Israel and the observance of the teaching of the Lord your God. Then you shall succeed if you observantly carry out the laws and the rules that the Lord charged Moses to lay upon Israel. Be strong and of good courage. Do not be afraid or dismayed. See, by denying myself, I have laid aside for the house of the Lord 100,000 talents of gold and 1,000,000 talents of silver, and so much copper and iron it cannot be weighed. I have also laid aside wood and stone, and you shall add to them. An abundance of workmen is at your disposal, hewers, workers in stone and wood, and every kind of craftsman in every kind of material. Gold, silver, copper, and iron without limit. Go and do it, and may the Lord be with you.
Yeah. So the book of Chronicles really, really tells us that David was involved in this construction. Basically, is setting Solomon up with everything he needs. He tells him, just do it. And he does tell him to add to it. He doesn't say, I've given you everything. He says, you need to add to it and you need to follow the Torah, which of course David wasn't always so great in following the Torah, but he tells him, you got to do it. You got to follow the Torah and you have to help other people follow the Torah, right? He says that, right? He says, you've got to, you know, put you in charge of Israel in the observance of teaching of the Lord your God. So Solomon is kind of charged with that. And again, if he ends up writing the book of Proverbs, the book of Ecclesiastes, right? We have a tradition that he wrote the Song of Songs as well. If he wrote those three books, he was definitely inspired to write a little bit of Torah, a little bit of the Tanakh himself. So it's a wonderful father kind of telling his son what's up, what's to do. And then, of course, he says, Chazak va'amatz. That's what we say, by the way, the Israeli army says, Chazak va'amatz. Be strong and be courageous. Chazak va'amatz. So that's the Israeli motto. That's like Semper Fi, Chazak va'amatz. And that comes from the Bible. Be strong and be courageous. So, yes, I've seen people tattoo this, by the way, on their arm. Not just Jews, by the way. I mean, I've seen Christians tattoo it in Hebrew on their arm. I'm not encouraging people to do it. I'm just saying that they've done it. I've seen it. Anyways, go ahead. Yes, John. No. There's not a book of Nathan, right? There's not a book. There's not a book. So he's mentioned in I know, right? So why is Nathan? So John's asking, why is there not a book of Nathan? The literary prophets, the prophets that we have in the Bible, come from about 200 years later. The earliest prophets that we can kind of date based on when they lived, based on which kings they live under. You're talking about the 800s. So the earliest is 700s. Isaiah, at least the first Isaiah, lives about 700. Now, Isaiah is not the first prophet, but he's one of the first. Like so, Hosea and Micah, those are some of the earliest prophets. We believe that they lived around 800s, based on what it says, based on when the kings lived. So, look, we know there's prophets before. There's prophets like we would say, really, we'd say kind of the first prophet is Moses. Interestingly, by the way, in Islam, they call the prophets the people who are mentioned in our Bible. They'll call them prophets, and they'll say Adam was a prophet, Noah was a prophet, Abraham was a prophet. They're all prophets. When we really talk about prophets, we're really talking about, to some extent, Moses speaking on behalf of God and kind of sharing a message to the masses. Well, you got to have masses in order to do that. So if somebody's just speaking, it's not like we wouldn't say Abraham wasn't a prophet. He had God spoke to him and he shared, but who was he actually sharing his message to? His family and maybe some followers. But when we get to Moses, we have a people, we have a nation, so we can say, well, the prophet's job is to speak to the masses. So it really starts with Moses. It continues on. We read about prophets like Samuel, and we read about prophets who are doing stuff early on during the time of the judges. But we definitely call some of the judges would be judges / prophet as well. I mean, we know that Deborah, for example, is a prophet / judge. But yes, we have these court prophets like Nathan who are doing their work, and we can see that just as Samuel did before, there are prophets, but they're not writing. We don't have the writings of their prophecies until we get to to those early prophets like Isaiah. And then that prophecy period, where everybody knows again, goes from about 800 to about 200, 250 to the prophets that we read about that are with the Jews as they come back from exile. And the prophets like Malachi, right, with Zechariah, we read about these prophets that are helping Ezra and Nehemiah. So there's still prophets that are actively prophesying during the Second Temple period while it's being built. But kind of after the Second Temple is built, we don't have any more words of prophecy. Look, the Talmud says that's when prophecy stopped. That's when God stops talking to people like that, which coincidentally, but not really coincidentally, is the time that the rabbis start to say the early Sforim, the early. We talked about this on Wednesday nights. This is when the rabbis kind of take over from the prophets, revealing the text, so that God doesn't need to speak anymore. It's all been spoken. It's now just a matter of revealing it, finding the message there. Which is again an interesting idea, which is like you have had enough of me talking to you. Now you're going to take what I've told you and figure it out. I don't need to talk to you and tell you what to do anymore. Which to me, is, and not to me, but to other people who've commented too, this is kind of what happens when you tell your children they're adults now. Like, it's not like I'm not going to tell you things. It's not like I'm going to not give you some pieces of advice, but you're kind of on your own now. You got to kind of figure it out. And I'm not going to tell you every day what to do. And that's kind of what happens when the period of the prophets ends is that I'm not going to tell you, I've already said it. How many more times do I need to tell you? I've told you, I've told you everything that you need to know. And by the way, if I keep telling you what you need to know, then you're never going to grow up. So there's that too, if you will. That's my own added. Well, no, that's not my own. I didn't invent that, but that's something that I come to understand as I've now been a parent of 20 somethings. You have to stop at some point to tell them what to do. Doesn't mean you're not there for them. It just means I've already said pretty much everything in the situations that you're in. So, yeah, David seems to, back to David, I've given you everything you need to do now. It's very much like the similar situation, which is Solomon, you're now old enough to take over. I'm going to be gone now. I'm about to die. So, assumedly, Solomon's about 40 now, 35, 40 years old. You're old enough now to take over, but he's still, according to David, he's still a little immature. He's still not ready, which again is normal for a guy who runs his business to think that the next generation of the family, even if it's his own kid, even if it's his own family, they're not ready yet. They're not ready. This guy doesn't know what he's doing. How does he not have a book? Yeah. So, yes. So, John's point, yes, Nathan is one of the more important people that we don't talk about. So there's a few people in the Bible that are mentioned that we don't know enough about, that we don't recognize, but who change everything. I told you, look, Ezra is, as I said a couple of weeks ago when we started Ezra and Nehemiah, and again, he's responsible for Chronicles. I mean, we're almost positive Ezra is the guy who actually edited this book together. If he didn't do it, one of his friends did it. Ezra's the other guy that, like in Jewish history, everybody should know Ezra's name, and they don't. But he is literally like, we believe there's a Moses. We believe there was a Moses. We don't have historical evidence that there was a Moses, but we have pretty strong historical evidence there was an Ezra. And it is very clear. And remember, Ezra lived 700 years after Moses, so it's not like, it's a long time. There's a lot of time that passes to get Ezra. Ezra is basically a contemporary of, like, he's living around the time that Greece, that Athens and Sparta and stuff like that. They're that's when that stuff's going on. That's Ezra's time. We know these people. I mean, we know these people existed. Yeah, Jennifer. Yeah, yeah. So, so, oh yeah, well, let me just finish one thing though. So the fact that Ezra is another one of these guys that we don't know about is yes, there are people, John, that we would like to know more about. Ezra, Nathan, there's probably again some like lines about people that that I mean, there's people that we would like to know the other side of the story, if you will, right? So like King Ahav, who's a horrible king according to the Book of Kings. He's the guy he's married to Jezebel. He does all these horrible things, but the dude is king for like 40 years, and he consolidates tremendous amount of power in northern Israel. Builds a beautiful palace of ivory that we found pieces of. We've actually found archaeological pieces of the digs. We found his temple, his palace. Like we'd like to know more about what this guy really was about because he was a major king of the Israelites. I mean, of our people. So there's people that we would like to know more about that we either don't have their story intentionally or we're just on the wrong side of history. But back to this question. No, no, it's a big state. Yeah, it's a huge statement because yes, yes, we are. It's part of what we have. Look, you can look at it one of two ways. Or you could look at it one of two ways. The history that we have isn't a history anyways, John. Remember, the agenda on this is so clear that the fact that we can reconstruct the fact that they gave us any history with it, because it's all propaganda. Everything we're reading is propaganda. This is propaganda for how the temple got built. It's propaganda. We would love to know the real story. Like they were workers that were gathered up from the people. What was that like? Were they slaves? Were they? You asked the question. Your question was an important question. How were they fed? Who maintained this? How long did this go on for? The Bible just says they took aliens from within aliens. So, foreigners, they took non-Israelites from within their community and did it. I'd like to know more about that, And so, um, yeah, there's a lot of stuff here that we don't know because it wasn't intended to really be a history. So when you understand that it was edited with a completely theological propagandist attitude, you can look at it one way, which is this isn't fair. But on the other hand, thank God we have it because if we didn't have it, we wouldn't know anything. If the kernels of history, the nuggets of history weren't there, we wouldn't know anything. But it was not written with the intention for you to know history. It wasn't like when we read history, we're like, I want to read this. I want to read this. And then when you're like, oh, I want to they just talked about this little war, this little battle. I want to know more about that battle. And you read another book about that battle. There's nothing more we can get. That's the crazy thing. We're lucky when we find the archaeological evidence for something and then it blows our mind. We're like, oh my gosh, that really happened. And then we get over that and then we're like, okay, but what can we really know from that? So that's what happens now. I mean, yeah, because we look at history that way. Our ancestors didn't look at history that way, by the way. They didn't have the same concerns about this that we did. I don't know. I mean, I shouldn't say nobody did, but most people didn't. Most people didn't. Yeah. Yes. Again, you could look at it from the yeah, people um we definitely live in a world where we want to know the whole story, right? We want to know the whole story. I want to know the whole story. Tell me the whole story. Yeah, we want to know the whole thing. I want to see everything. People didn't always approach life like that or history or understanding where they came from like that. You and I, we were raised with a different mentality and a different framework, a different way of looking at history, a different way of looking at ourselves. I mean, look, You don't think families didn't know about the weird stuff that happened in their families? They didn't talk about it. You know, somebody somebody had an illegitimate child somewhere. They didn't talk about it. It just happened, and you're like, what? You didn't know you had a you didn't I yeah, but macro micro, the reality is that people, if your framework isn't, we're not going to talk about everything. Like if it's not important, if it makes us feel bad, we're not going to talk about it. It's not just that they didn't want to talk about because it made him feel bad, but it was like, what's the purpose? They must have looked at things and said, this is not, we don't need to carry that. Yeah, they can judge for themselves, and we have to understand that there's part of that is that it's the end of people being able to have mythic characters. Nobody talked about Thomas Jefferson's black family for 200 years. No one talked about it. 50 years, 40 years ago, they started talking about it. They started talking about Sally Hemings. No one even when I was a kid, I didn't know about that. No history teacher said we're going to learn about, Thomas Jefferson's slave family. Okay, well, yeah, sometimes they just don't have time. Sometimes they don't have time for, I know, but sometimes we don't have time, and they should, right? They should teach about Zoroastrianism. But I will tell you that there was this level of interest and openness about talking about people's not good sides that that our ancestors clearly didn't have. And by the way, we had it more than others. Otherwise, we would know about Bathsheba, because Bathsheba is not a story that that most people would have talked about in the way that it was talked about in our case. It's not that our characters are flawed; it's that they are actually, of course, they're flawed. But what the consequences of these are real consequences, not again mythic consequences, practical consequences. What do you do when you have another family that was caused by infidelity and murder and again, making somebody who shouldn't have been king, king? Think about that. That's a huge thing. So, to Jennifer's question, this wonderful line that David tells his son, the Hebrew um, translation of it is in my poverty. The word in Hebrew is oni, which is affliction or poverty. That I denied myself is a less it's a less severe translation. But this idea that David did not take all the money himself, but set aside this tremendous amount of money for the temple is obviously a lesson for Solomon that you need to do that too. You need to make sure that whatever you have for yourself, you're setting some of the stuff aside for God. David, at least the way he says it, is he set a lot aside from him. And it does seem like David is less concerned with this kind of stuff than what we're going to learn about with Solomon. That Solomon is maybe the guy who maybe would, I don't know, build a ballroom on the side of the on the side of the palace. David doesn't seem to be into that kind of stuff. David seems to understand that, like, maybe as a ruler, not living in an ostentatious way. And remember, it's partly because the dude was living on the run for a good chunk of the time. King Saul was trying to kill him. David already considered himself king, and he's living on the lam. He's living as a mercenary. He's not living high on the hog, so to speak. He is not, he lives for about the first 40 years of his life in a fairly, we would assume, a fairly Spartan way until he comes into Jerusalem after Saul's death and is made king. So the first 40 years of, so let's say the first 15, 20 years of his life, he was upper middle class farmer, landowner. His father is successful Bethlehem landowner. Okay. So he's not born into poverty. Let's assume that first of all. But he also is living in the country. He's not living in Jerusalem. He's not living in a major city. He's living in Bethlehem, which is the equivalent of, Omaha, Nebraska, right? It's Sioux City, Iowa. He's living in the middle of the agricultural heartland. and he's not a city guy. He then spends the next 15 years of his life living on the lam and living out fighting. And then at 40, he comes back into Jerusalem. Or, by the way, part of the time when he first left his shepherd field hand, I'm growing up in my father's house as like the seventh kid, you know. I was going to inherit something, but probably not a lot. By the way, he was, out shepherding and doing stuff for his dad. You know, when he first gets called into Saul, after he kills Goliath and spends a few years as Saul's in Saul's retinue, he was living in the palace. He was living a good life. But then the next, 15 years of his life, he's living on the run, 15 years until he's 40. And when he finally comes into Jerusalem and then is made king, then he can live the last, 40 years of his life as a king living the good life. But it probably his first 40 years influenced his decisions of spending. And so when he says, I saved money for God, I think we could take him at his word. I think it's legitimate to think that this guy lived a more frugal existence than his son Solomon, who was born in the palace in Jerusalem, was raised very comfortably as a prince, and probably, was accustomed to the finer things in life. I mean, you don't have to imagine very hard. You don't have to think about it very hard to kind of imagine and paint the picture of what Solomon was like. Entitled guy. But his dad cautions him and says, look, right? Set aside some stuff from God, for God, right? So here's what it says he did.
David charged all the officers of Israel to support his son Solomon. See, the Lord your God is with you, and he will give you rest on every side, for he delivered the inhabitants of the land into my hand, so that the land lies conquered before the Lord and before his people. Now, set your minds and hearts on worshiping the Lord your God, and go build the sanctuary of the Lord your God, so that you may bring the ark of the covenant of the Lord and the holy vessels of God to the house that is built for the name of the Lord.
That's beautiful, right? Worship God and build the stuff. Build it. Build it. Not just the temple. Build all the stuff that you need, right? For the house, for the permanent residence. And here's what it says.
When David reached a ripe old age, he made his son Solomon king over Israel. Then David assembled all the officers of Israel and the priests and the Levites. The Levites, from the age of 30 and upward, were counted. The head count of their males was 38,000. Of these, there were 24,000 in charge of the work of the house of the Lord, 6,000 officers and magistrates, 4,000 gatekeepers, and 4,000 for praising the Lord with instruments I devised for singing praises.
Yep. So we're going to now get into the details. Now we get into the weeds because this is now going to be counting. This is now going to be what's going on. So again, this is David doing this. It's what it says. It doesn't say Solomon did this. It says David did this. Now, let's assume, again, this was written hundreds of years later. But clearly the agenda here is to tell us this is not Solomon's idea. This was not something that he did. This was something that David did. And if David did it, it means it's part of the dynasty. It was from the very beginning part of the plan. And having these guys, do their work. So the Levites, it says 38,000 men, 30 and upward, right? And you can see 24,000 were put into the actual temple work. Meaning, again, making the linen, making the, helping to do the fine work of the temple. But you can also see that some of them were administrators. Some of them were gatekeepers, and some of them were musicians. So all of those were part of um, what the Levites did. Now, this is in addition to the priests, but this is the whole tribe. This is the tribe of the Levites. And again, it shows you that they wanted these people here in Jerusalem and they wanted them employed in Jerusalem. We've talked about this before. That means they're not out in the country making people do other stuff, um, taking care of other shrines in other parts of Israel. Now, what we know is they were most definitely doing that. The Levites did not shut down their shrines in the rest of Israel at this point. We know it because we know that they're doing work. 50 years later, when Solomon's reign comes to an end, and Jeroboam is establishing a temple in Dan and in Bethel, there are Levites doing work in those places, and they never had stopped. So, as much as David and Solomon want to consolidate everybody into Jerusalem, it was not happening. Not happening. Here we go.
David formed them into divisions. The sons of Levi, Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. The Gershonites, Ladan and Shimei. The sons of Ladan, Yehiel the chief, Setam, and Yoel, 3. The sons of Shimei, Shalomit, Haziel, and Haran, 3. These were the chiefs of the clans of the Ladanites. And the sons of Shimei, Yahat, Zina, Yeush, and Bariah. These were the sons of Shimei, 4. Yahat was the chief and Ziza the second, but Yeush and Bariah did not have many children, so they were enrolled together as a single clan. The sons of Kohath, Amram, Ishar, Hebron, and Uziel, 4. The sons of Amram, Aaron, and Moses. Aaron was set apart, he and his sons forever, to be consecrated as most holy, to make burnt offerings to the Lord and serve him, and pronounce blessings in his name forever. As for Moses, the man of God, his sons were named after the tribe of Levi. The sons of Moses, Gershom and Eleazar. The sons of Gershom, Shevuel the chief, and the sons of Eleazar were Rehabiah the chief. Eleazar had no other sons, but the sons of Rehabiah were very numerous.
So, this is one of the only things we know about Moses' family. Now, again, this is the Levites. These are divided, as we saw from all the way back. Levi has 3 sons: Gershom, Merari, and right here, you see him? Kohath. Now, Kohath is the one that we kind of pay attention to because Kohath is the ancestor of Amram, and Amram is Aaron and Moses' dad. So as we go through the generations of the Levites, we get to this one, and this is where you really obviously see Aaron's family are set apart. The Kohanim are going to be the ones who actually do the sacrifices. We've already said this. By the time of Chronicles, yes, that's the case. You can say this and get away with it. When it's in the book of Samuel and the book of Kings, no, you can't say that because there are still Levites that are doing sacrifices and they're not Kohanim. They're not Aaron's family. So the idea that the Levites are only going to be doing things in the temple like playing instruments and helping to take care of cleaning the place, that is not what they were doing. And I'm not saying that because I want to just, cause problems. I don't want to cause problems. I'm telling you that because the Bible tells us that. And again, it's one of the most obvious, non-obvious things in the Bible, which is that the Levites were priests. They were people who made sacrifices. And the Kohanim, under the force and authority of David and his family, enforce that. David literally and his family say, essentially here and in the book of Samuel, you no longer have authority to make a sacrifice unless you're a Kohen. It's a major departure from what the Israelites did up until that time. And we don't talk about it because it's so obvious later on that nobody has to say it, but it has to be said, and you have to be reminded of it. This is not the way it was necessarily supposed to be. So Moses' family not being able to be employed as priests, if you will, probably did not make them happy. If you're one of the descendants of Moses, and your descendants are not, you as one of those descendants are not as important as Aaron's sons, you're like, wait, our ancestor is Moses. You're telling me that Aaron's sons are more important than me? And I'm saying that, and I'm looking at Mike right now because he's one of those guys. As a Levite, you're like, wait, I, I, you're telling me that I don't get to do sacrifices anymore? This is not. Yeah, you get to wash feet now. You can't say that without laughing because that is not the way it was supposed to be, or at least not the way that it was. Now, again, that's one of the reasons why the Davidic line is so important to the Kohanim because they're the ones who give them the authority to do this. So, John, when we talk about the agenda, this is the agenda. This is the agenda that we never talk about because it's not important to us. It happened so long ago that we don't even care. But for the people who wrote this, for the people who preserved this, for the people who edited this, for the people who literally are passing this down, they just rolled something over on everybody, which is we're in charge and the Levites are no longer in charge. Not that they're not doing anything. I'm not saying they're stripped of all power, but to use Mike's term, they're washing feet now. And if I were the son of Moses, or the descendant of Moses, I wouldn't have liked that, and they didn't like it. So don't think that they thought that this was okay. They were not, and they supported the Northern Israelite kingdom because of it. So why would I need to be washing someone's feet in Jerusalem when I can offer sacrifices in Bethel? I'm not gonna work for the Kohanim. I want to be now again. The Northern Kingdom didn't fare very well, and so the justification for doing what they're doing for the Kohanim is, hey, who did God pick? God didn't pick the North. God picked us. So the agenda here is very much affirming that the Kohanim are going to be the ones in charge. And once they are the ones who win, of course, you did it wrong. We're doing it right. That's why. Some of those feet did not smell good. That's what Mike's saying. So that's their job. All right. So let's read about this long list. The long list is here because there's an agenda, and that's what I'm telling you. When you read this, it's not here because they just want to give you lists and names. They want to make sure you know who's in charge.
The sons of Ishar, Shalomit the chief. The sons of Hebron, Uriah the chief, Amariah the second, Yahaziel the third, and Yekamayam the fourth. The sons of Uziel, Micah the chief, and Ishiah the second. The sons of Merari, Machli and Mushi. The sons of Machli, Eleazar and Kish. Eleazar died having no sons, but only daughters. The sons of Kish, their kinsmen, married them. The sons of Mushi, Machli, Eder, and Yeramot, 3. These are the sons of Levi by clans with their clan chiefs, as they were enrolled with a list of their names by heads, who did the work of the service of the house of the Lord from the age of 20 and upward.
Yeah, so this one says 20 and upward. The last one said 30 and upward. This was 20 and upward.
For David said, "The Lord God of Israel has given rest to his people and made his dwelling in Jerusalem forever. Therefore, the Levites need not carry the tabernacle and all its various service vessels."
Which, again, is a very convenient way of saying to the Levites, you're no longer needed to do those kinds of things. Now you work in the temple. You work in the temple. But again, here's what you're going to do.
Among the last
Wait.
acts, oh,
So, yeah, John? Yeah. So, yeah, David has the power to do that. And the power of making Jerusalem the religious center, which means that the Kohanim are in charge, at least financially. Yeah.
among the last acts of David was the counting of the Levites from the age of 20 and upward, for their appointment was alongside the Aaronites for the service of the house of the Lord, to look after the courts and the chambers and the purity of all the holy things and the performance of the service of the house of God, and the rows of bread and the fine flour for the meal offering and the unleavened wafers and the cakes made on the griddle and soaked, and every measure of capacity and length, and to be present every morning to praise and extol the Lord, and at evening too, and whenever offerings were made to the Lord, according to the quantities prescribed for them, on Sabbaths, new moons, and holidays, regularly before the Lord. And so to keep watch over the tent of meeting, over the holy things, and over the Aaronites, their kinsmen, for the service of the house of the Lord.
Yeah. So, it's not like they don't have anything to do, but bringing the Levites under the service, under the patronage and the kind of the under the authority of the Kohanim is one of the most important things that was ever done. And we don't talk about it anymore. And when we talk about people we don't talk about this major revolution that happened in Israelite theology. And it was a major revolution in the societal structure. Because again, when you're taking the Levites, when you're taking the tribe and saying, this entire tribe of people and saying, well, you don't really have the chance to do sacrifices anymore. And you don't really have the authority to, you're not in charge of the ark anymore. Remember, the Levites controlled the ark until this moment. Until they bring it into Jerusalem, the Levites were the one in charge of the ark. We're bringing it into the temple, and now the Kohanim are going to be the ones who are in charge of it. Again, the Levites, it's a much bigger group. It's a tribe, and the Kohanim are only a part of that tribe. But you're going to elevate one part of the tribe over all the others, and that's what happens. And now we're going to get these are the priests. These are the Kohanim. These are the Bnei Aaron.
The divisions of the Aaronites were the sons of Aaron, Nadav and Abihu, Eleazar and Itamar. Nadav and Abihu died in the lifetime of their father, and they had no children. So Eleazar and Itamar served as priests. David, Zadok of the sons of Eleazar, and Ahimelech of the sons of Itamar divided them into offices by their tasks. The sons of Eleazar turned out to be more numerous by male heads than the sons of Itamar. So they divided the sons of Eleazar into 16 chiefs of clans, and the sons of Itamar into 8 clans.
Right. So that's 24, which you can guess is 2 per 12, 2 per
2 per tribe.
2 per month,
Mm.
2 per the divisions of how the temple service could be rotated into shifts. So that's very important. So of those, 2/3 are Eleazar's descendants, and 1/3 are Itamar's.
They divided them by lot, both on an equal footing, since they were all sanctuary officers and officers of God, the sons of Eleazar and the sons of Itamar. Shemaiah, son of Nethanel, the scribe, who was of the Levites, registered them under the eye of the king, the officers, and Zadok the priest, and Ahimelech, son of Abiatar, and the chiefs of clans of the priests and Levites, 1 clan more taken for Eleazar for each one taken of Itamar. The first lot fell on Jehoiarib, the second on Yediah, the third on Harim, the fourth on Serim, the fifth on Malchiah, the sixth on Miyamin, the seventh on Hakoz, the eighth on Abiyah, the ninth on Yeshua, the 10th on Shechaniah, the 11th on Eliashib, the 12th on Yakim, the 13th on Chuppah, the 14th on Yesheveav, the 15th on Bilgah, the 16th on Immer, the 17th on Hezir, the 18th on Hapizez, the 19th on Petahiah, the 20th on Yehezkel, the 21st on Yakin, the 22nd on Gamul, the 23rd on Delaiah, the 24th on Maaziah.
Wow. Very good. And
According to this allocation of offices by tasks, they were to enter the house of the Lord as was laid down for them by Aaron their father, as the Lord God of Israel had commanded him.
yeah, and again, not literally their father, but their grandfather and their great grandfather, Aaron. And that's how they divided up. The 24th, would be again the the grandson of, well, the great grandson of Aaron, Maziah. So that's what these guys get. They get a shift. Each one of them gets a shift, and they decided it by a lottery, by selecting numbers.
The remaining Levites, the sons of Amram, Shuvael, the sons of Shuvael, Yediah, Rehabiah, the sons of Rehabiah, Ishiah the chief, Israelites, Shalomot, the sons of Shalomot, Yahat and Benai, Uriah the second, Amariah the third, Yahaziel the fourth, Yekamiam, the sons of Uziel, Micah, the sons of Micah, Shemir, the brother of Micah, Ishiah, the sons of Ishiah, Zechariah, the sons of Merari, Mahli and Mushi, the sons of Yaasiah his son, the sons of Merari by Yaasiah his son, Shoham, Zakur, and Ivri, Mahli, Eleazar, he had no sons, Kish, the sons of Kish, Yeramiel, the sons of Mushi, Mahli, Eder, and Yerimot. These were the sons of the Levites by their clans. These two cast lots corresponding to their kinsmen, the sons of Aaron, under the eye of King David and Zadok and Ahimelech and the chiefs of the clans of the priests and Levites, on the principle of chief and youngest brother alike.
Yeah, and again, we're not exactly sure what that phrase, why that phrase was used, chief and youngest brother alike, but there seems to be this idea that like everybody gets a shift. Whether they're the firstborn or whether they're the eighth born, they all get a shift. So that is those are the divisions of the priests. Now, eventually, those divisions get so big that we have a problem of how you're going to let everybody do stuff. Because let's say the tribe of the Levites was too big to be in charge of all of this stuff. Or let's say all of this stuff. There are too many workers and not enough jobs, not enough tasks. Well, then you have a problem that, okay, so we'll make only the Kohanim the people who can do sacrifices. Well, then you're going to now say, well, 5 generations later, 10 generations later, we have too many Kohanim. We don't need this many priests. This is a problem. Now, again, if everyone offered up sacrifices in their own backyard, it would be necessary to have more, but not if they're only in Jerusalem. And how do you keep that many people in Jerusalem? You don't need them all there. All right, so let's also look at what these people do.
David and the officers of the army set apart for service the sons of Asaph of Hemam and Yedutun, who prophesied to the accompaniment of lyres, harps, and cymbals. The list of men who performed this work according to their service was sons of Asaph, Zakur, Joseph, Netaniah, and Azarellah, sons of Asaph under the charge of Asaph, who prophesied by order of the king. Yedutun, the sons of Yedutun, Gedaliah, Zariah, Jeshiah, Hashabiah, Mattitiah, 6, under the charge of their father Jedutun, who, accompanied on the harp, prophesied, praising and extolling the Lord. Heman, the sons of Heman, Bukiah, Mattaniah, Uzziel, Shevuel, Yeremot, Hananiah, Hanani, Eliata, Gidalti, Romamti Ezer, Yoshbekasha, Meloti, Hotir, and Mahaziot. All these were sons of Heman, the seer of the king, who uttered prophecies of God for his greater glory. God gave Heman 14 sons and 3 daughters. All these were under the charge of their father for the singing in the house of the Lord to the accompaniment of cymbals, harps, and lyres for the service of the house of God by order of the king, Asaph, Yedutun, and Heman. Their total number with their kinsmen, trained singers of the Lord, all the masters, 288.
And again, we know that some of these people are mentioned, like Asaph and Yedutun. They're mentioned in the book of Psalms. They're mentioned there as people who wrote some of the Psalms. B'nai Asaph. These are Psalms of the B'nai Asaph. So we know that they did. Now, this book also says that what they are doing is not just making songs, but they're prophecies, if you will. They understand that what they're doing is not just writing music, but actually communicating God's words through the music. So that's kind of what they're saying, right? They're saying that they are not just making song, beautiful song, praising song, but they're actually they're conveying God's word in the song. So that's what it says right here. Who uttered prophecies. So that is part of what they do. And it's part of what we see the books of Psalms to be about.
They cast lots for shifts on the principle of small and great alike, like master, like apprentice. The first lot fell to Asaph, to Joseph the second, to Gedaliah, he and his brothers and his sons, 12. The third to Zakur, his sons and his brothers, 12. The fourth to Izri, his sons and his brothers, 12. The fifth to Netaniah, his sons and his brothers, 12. The sixth to Bukiah, his sons and his brothers, 12. The seventh to Yesarela, his sons and his brothers, 12. The eighth to Yeshaiah, his sons and his brothers, 12. The ninth to Mattaniah, his sons and his brothers, 12. The 10th to Shimei, his sons and his brothers, 12. The 11th to Azarel, his sons and his brothers, 12. The 12th to Hashabiah, his sons and his brothers, 12. The 13th to Shuvael, his sons and his brothers, 12. The 14th to Mattatiah, his sons and his brothers, 12. The 15th to Yeremot, his sons and his brothers, 12. The 16th to Hananiah, his sons and his brothers, 12. The 17th to Yoshbekasha, his sons and his brothers, 12. The 18th to Hanani, his sons and his brothers, 12. The 19th to Maloti, his sons and his brothers, 12. The 20th to Eliata, his sons and his brothers, 12. The 21st to Hotir, his sons and his brothers, 12. The 22nd to Gidalti, his sons and his brothers, 12. The 23rd to Mahaziot, his sons and his brothers, 12. The 24th to Ramamti Ezer, his sons and his brothers, 12.
These are, again, the Levites, the division of the Levites, right? So you can see they're assigned to each one of the Kohanim, the 24 divisions of Kohanim. You also have now these singers. And then, and again, this is kind of where we're finishing today with these long lists of people. These are the gatekeepers.
The divisions of the gatekeepers, Korahites, Meshelemiah, son of Korah, of the sons of Asaph. Sons of Meshelemiah, Zechariah the firstborn, Yediael the second, Zebadiah the third, Yatniel the fourth, Elam the fifth, Jehonathan the sixth, Eliahoneh the seventh, sons of Obed Edom, Shemaiah the firstborn, Jehozabad the second, Joah the third, Sakar the fourth, Netanel the fifth, Amiel the sixth, Issachar the seventh, Peulatai the eighth, for God had blessed him. To his son Shemaiah were born sons who exercised authority in their clans because they were men of substance. The sons of Shemaiah, Otni, Raphael, Obed, Elzabad, his brothers, men of ability, were Elihu and Semachiah. All these sons of Obed Edom, they and their sons and brothers, strong and able men for the service, 62 of Obed Edom. Meshelemiah had sons and brothers, able men, 18. Hosah of the Merarites had sons. Shimri, the chief, he was not the firstborn, but his father designated him chief. Hilkiah the second, Tevaliah the third, Zechariah the fourth, all the sons and brothers of Hosah, 13. These are the divisions of the gatekeepers by their chief men who worked in shifts corresponding to their kinsmen, ministering in the house of the Lord. They cast lots, small and great alike, by clans for each gate. The lot for the east gate fell to Shelemiah. Then they cast lots for Zechariah his son, a prudent counselor, and his lot came out to be the north gate. For Obed-Edom, the south gate, and for his sons, the vestibule. For Shuppim and for Hosah, the west gate, with the Shalachet gate on the ascending highway. Watch corresponded to watch. At the east, 6 Levites. At the north, 4 daily. At the south, 4 daily. At the vestibule, 2 by 2. At the colonnade on the west, 4 at the causeway and 2 at the colonnade. These were the divisions of the gatekeepers of the sons of Korah and the sons of Merari.
So, what is this all about? This discussion of how the gatekeepers were broken up in the first temple? Well, obviously, we read earlier in Ezra and Nehemiah by the same authors, we think, the list of the gatekeepers and the people who reconstructed the gate during the time of the second temple. So it's very important for them to establish who were in charge of these places during the first temple, because again, it helps establish the importance of what they did. Even if it's not, we know it's not the same people. We have the list of the people, but when we see who the people who were in charge were, it affirms that the work that these people are doing follows in the footsteps of those people who did it at the first temple too. Okay, so this is, let's assume that this exercise in giving this list has a reason. I mean, I believe it has a reason, and let's say that it's based on evidence or works of lists that the archives that they had access to. We don't have this list in the book of Samuel and the book of Kings. We don't have these lists. It was not important to the author of Kings to tell us who was in charge of the temple, which tribes were, which clans were, which families were. We don't have that. We don't have that. This author, it's very important to him because, again, he was doing this in his own day. So those are the gates. And then these lists, again, even though they're not in the book of Samuel and Kings, which are older books, these, we assume that these records were kept and that people had them, and that obviously they were important to this writer, to this editor. Yep. Okay.
These were the divisions of the gate. Where are we?
Right here.
Um,
And the Levites.
And the Levites, Ahiah over the treasuries of the house of God and the treasuries of the dedicated things. The sons of Ladan, the sons of the Gershonites belonging to Ladan, the chiefs of the clans of Ladan, the Gershonite, Yehieli. The sons of Yehieli, Yetzetam and Yoel. His brother was over the treasuries of the house of the Lord. Of the Amronites, the Israelites, the Hebronites, the Uzzielites, Shevuel, son of Gershom, son of Moses, was the chief officer over the treasuries. And his brothers, Eleazar, his son Rehabiah, his son Yeshaiah, his son Joram, his son Zikri, his son Shelomit. That Shelomit and his brothers were over all the treasuries of dedicated things that were dedicated by King David, and the chiefs of the clans, and the officers of thousands and hundreds, and the other army officers. They dedicated some of the booty of the wars to maintain the house of the Lord. All that Samuel the seer had dedicated, and Saul son of Kish, and Abner son of Ner, and Joab son of Zeruiah, or what any other man had dedicated, was under the charge of Shelomit and his brothers. The Israelites, Hananiah and his sons, were over Israel as clerks and magistrates for affairs outside the sanctuary. The Hebronites, Hashabiah and his brothers, capable men, 1,700, supervising Israel on the west side of the Jordan in all matters of the Lord and the service of the king. The Hebronites, Uriah, the chief of the Hebronites, they were investigated in the 40th year of David's reign by clans of all their lines, and men of substance were found among them in Yezer Gilead. His brothers, able men, 2,700, chiefs of clans, David put them in charge of the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh in all matters of God and matters of the king.
Yep. So these are the other responsibilities that um, that they were, again, that this tribe is going to be taken care of. Um, Let us finish up with these last parts of Chronicles, or the first book of Chronicles, because David is still alive while this is happening. Okay, David is still there. How do we know that? Well, yeah, it says David put them in charge. So the Solomon is there in the background already. I mean, we've definitely been introduced to him. We were told that David's setting aside the stuff that he needs and getting him all prepped, but this is still David. So Chronicles is going, the break in Chronicles, the first Chronicles ends with this part, which is not in the book of Samuel. This is not where Samuel, or in that you could argue, because the book of Kings, David is still alive in the first few chapters. I'll show it to you when we get to the end, or when we start the new book tomorrow, next week. By the way, somebody asked me in our group, what do we do tomorrow night with Wednesday night class? I promise you, if this ends tonight, I mean, if it's going to end on Wednesday night, we will not have class. I know no one's going to be there. I'm not an idiot. Okay. I want to be, stop it. You hate the Dodgers. Sorry, you can't. I know Glory's on the line right now. John has no credibility on this right now. We do not listen to John on matters of Dodgers. He hates them. All right. So even you have to say, you got to watch this stuff. This is like watching, even if you don't like it, this is an episode of something you have to watch, because it's just too nuts. It's too weird. It's too
I
weird.
think he's just all talk.
Okay.
Because he does watch it.
I know he had to. He admitted it.
And
all
we
right.
stayed up till whatever last night.
Yeah, Glory, you
it.
didn't hear, but Dina actually drove back after that
Oh my God.
to San Diego, 12 o'clock. I asked her. I
She
told
go
her
to
she could
work?
stay overnight.
Did she go to
She's
work?
teaching right now. She's teaching right now. The
Good
girl
girl.
knows her stuff, man. She lives the blazer life, as we say. So you gotta. She had to. Her kids hate her. No, they love her, but they all root against her. Her little San Diego kids. Miss Blazer, Miss Blazer, I want you to lose. That's what they tell her. I want you to lose. All right. All right. Let's read this last part of Chronicles, that what these families were in charge of. All right.
The number of Israelites, chiefs of clans, officers of thousands and hundreds, and their clerks, who served the king in all matters of the divisions, who worked in monthly shifts during all the months of the year, each division 24,000. Over the first division for the first month, Yeshabeam, son of Zavdiel, his division had 24,000. Of the sons of Perez, he, the chief of all the officers of the army, served for the first month. Over the division of the second month, Dodai the Ahahite, Miklot was chief officer of his division. His division had 24,000. The third army officer for the third month, Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, the chief priest, his division had 24,000. That was Benaiah, one of the warriors of the 30, and over the 30, and over his division was Amizabad, his son. The fourth, for the fourth month, Asahel, brother of Joab, and his son Zebadiah after him, his division had 24,000. The fifth, for the fifth month, the officer Shamhut the Israelite, his division had 24,000. The sixth, for the sixth month, Erah, son of Ikesh the Tekoite, his division had 24,000. The seventh, for the seventh month, scroll down a little.
Sorry. Yeah.
Pelez the Pelonite of the Ephraimites, his division had 24,000. The eighth, for the eighth month, Sibbecai the Hushathite of Zerah, his division had 24,000. The ninth, for the ninth month, Abiezer the Anatothite of Benjamin, his division had 24,000. The 10th, for the 10th month, Machrai the Netophahite of Zerah, his division had 24,000. The 11th, for the 11th month, Benaiah the Piratonite of the Ephraimites, his division had 24,000. The 12th, for the 12th month, Heldai the Netophahite of Othniel, his division had 24,000. Over the tribes of Israel, Reuben the chief officer, Eleazar son of Zikri, Simeon, Shephatiah son of Maacah, Levi, Hashabiah son of Kemuel, Aaron, Zadok, Judah, Elihu of the brothers of David, Issachar, Omri son of Michael, Zebulun, Ishmaiah son of Obadiah, Naphtali, Yeremot son of Azriel, Ephraimites, Hoshea son of Azaziah, the half-tribe of Manasseh, Yoel son of Pedaiah, half Manasseh in Gilead, Edo son of Zechariah, Benjamin, Yaasiel son of Avner, Dan, Azarel son of Jeroham. These were the officers of the tribes of Israel. David did not take a census of those under 20 years of age, for the Lord had promised to make Israel as numerous as the stars of heaven. Joab, son of Zeruiah, did begin to count them, but he did not finish. Wrath struck Israel on account of this, and the census was not entered into the account of the Chronicles of King David.
Yeah, and we read that. I mean, that's what we read, that this plague hit and this counting stopped. Now we're gonna finish this chapter up, and then you're gonna actually see how David says goodbye. But David again splitting up the responsibilities, and you could see flat out it's by month, right? Each month, these different divisions are in charge. So right here, when it says these people who worked in not the temple, but this is the people who worked, in matters of let's say administration, governmental administration, are also done by month. And then we get into the tribal leaders who are also obviously divided up, and the leaders of each one of the tribes. Now, this part's interesting.
Over the royal treasuries, Asmavet, son of Adiel, over the treasuries in the country, in the towns, the hamlets, and the citadels, Jonathan, son of Uzziah. Over the field laborers in agricultural work, Ezri, son of Chelub. Over the vineyards, Shimei the Ramathite. And over the produce in the vineyards for wine cellars, Zavdi the Shifmite. Over the olive trees and the sycamores in the Shephelah, Baal Hanan the Gederite. Over the oil stores, Joash. Over the cattle pasturing in Sharon, Shirtai the Sharonite. And over the cattle in the valleys, Shaphat, son of Adlai. Over the camels, Ovil the Ishmaelite, and over the she-asses, Yediah the Meronotite. Over the flocks, Yaziz the Hagrite. All these were stewards of the property of King David.
So these are the people who are in charge of King David's stuff. And you can see what King David owns. That he's the only person who owns stuff. So yeah, well, he has every little bit of everything. He's diversified. He has he, he yes, he is the king. It's good to be the king. You have royal treasuries, right? And you have treasuries that are in the different cities, right? Those are kind of like the banks, field laborers, vineyards. You can see olive trees and sycamore trees. There's the autographed. And what you have to assume is the people he put in charge of these things knew what they were doing, which is why you bring in an Arab. You bring in an Arab to take care of the camels. It says right here, Obil the Ishmaelite. Let's get an Arab in charge of that. It's flat out what it says. The Hagrites, who are also probably the descendants of Hagar, he puts them in charge of the flocks. Another smart thing to do. These are nomads. These are Bedouins, right? This is what these guys are doing. So here's the rest of this crew, David's crew. These are his insiders, the court.
Yonatan, David's uncle, was a counselor, a master, and a scribe. Yehiel, son of Hachmoni, was with the king's sons. Ahitophel was a counselor to the king. Hushai the Archite was the king's friend. After Ahitophel were Jehoiada, the son of Benaiah, and Abiatar. The commander of the king's army was Joab.
Yeah. And so we know about these guys, right? We know about Benaiah, right? We know about him being in charge of the Praetorian Guard, if you will. Abiatar, who's the priest, and of course Joab, who's the commander of the army. These are other people in the court. We know about Ahitophel. We learned about him. He's the one who goes over to Absalom when the revolution happens, when the coup happens. He goes to the other side and he counsels Absalom. And he gives Absalom really good advice because everything Ahitophel says is going to happen. He's that brilliant. Yeah. Like Scherzer, no, it was more like having Walker Bueller in the bullpen of Phillies, being able to tell them what was going on. Having that insider information. But guess what happens? Ahitophel is not listened to because this other guy in the Absalom entourage is working for David secretively, and of course tells Absalom, don't listen to Ahitophel, even though Ahitophel was right in the advice that he gave him. And when Absalom doesn't listen to Ahitophel's advice, Ahitophel goes home and kills himself. It's one of the few mentions of suicide we have in the Bible. And he's like, yeah, I'm done. I'm not going to help this guy anymore. I'm over. And we're going to lose now. And of course, that's what happens. So Achitophel is mentioned here as the counselor. So that's how important he was. It's right there. It doesn't go through the story of what happened to him, but it does tell us he was that important to him there. So we're going to finish up with this chapter right here. I don't think chapter 29 is the last chapter, but let's see what happens in 28. I mean, I don't want to rush through this because this one actually is not just a list of names. This is actually, according to what we have here, this is what David says to the people before he dies.
David assembled all the officers of Israel, the tribal officers, the divisional officers who served the king, the captains of thousands and the captains of hundreds, and the stewards of all the property and cattle of the king and his sons, with the eunuchs and the warriors, all the men of substance, to Jerusalem.
Yeah, not really sure how you're supposed to have eunuchs, by the way.
Yeah.
You know?
We're not supposed to have them, right?
Yeah, well, eunuchs you're not supposed to do that to people. Now, if they already were eunuchs and they were signed up for that already, then you could argue, no, that's just what they did. But that's the word sarisim right there. That's the word. And they're obviously very important because they're mentioned right with the giburim, the men of valor, the warriors, right? And all the whole gibor, all the important people. Yeah. They were obviously part of the office, if you will.
King David rose to his feet and said, "Hear me, my brothers, my people. I want to build a resting place for the ark of the covenant of the Lord, for the footstool of our God." And I laid aside material for building. But God said to me, "You will not build a house for my name, for you are a man of battles and have shed blood. The Lord God of Israel chose me of all my father's house to be king over Israel forever, for he chose Judah to be ruler, and of the family of Judah, my father's house, and of my father's sons, he preferred to make me king over all Israel."
Yeah, and what David's kind of saying here is, I'm not the one who necessarily should have been king. You look at my family, you look at my tribe, you look at everything else, I'm maybe the least likely, but I'm the king. And that had to be God's doing. And with that comes obviously a certain sense of, gratitude. I would say there's a little level of self-deprecation here, which is, I don't know. Now, I can't build a temple, but I was given power. And here's what he says. Whoa, so, yeah.
Yeah.
No, he was given power. Well, he didn't. Nate, yeah, but when David doesn't build a temple, he feels like this is a legitimate look. If he had argued with it, right? If he had argued over, he didn't argue over it. He believed it. So yeah, you could say that Nathan didn't really have the word of God. Whatever. The point is that David internalized the fact that he wasn't going to do it, either because God told him he wasn't going to do it, or because he had so much guilt about what he had done that he wasn't going to do it. He didn't do it. And he says, with humility to some extent, I think, I'm not doing it. I couldn't do it. I wanted to do it. He says, I wanted to do it. He said that. I wanted to. That's what I wanted to do. He loved God. He's not perfect. He's not by any means necessarily, again, a perfect person, but he says, I loved God. I wanted to build a house for God. I wanted to build it. I saved up all the money for it. I can get to do it. I can get to do it. And again, here's what he says.
"And of all my sons, for many are the sons the Lord gave me, he chose my son Solomon to sit on the throne of the kingdom of the Lord over Israel. He said to me, 'It will be your son Solomon who will build my house and my courts, for I have chosen him to be a son to me, and I will be a father to him. I will establish his kingdom forever if he keeps firmly to the observance of my commandments and rules as he does now.'"
So he basically says, look, everything will be good for him if he does right by God, which he's doing now, and you better keep doing that. And of course, we know that he might not have always been doing that.
"And now, in the sight of all Israel, the congregation of the Lord, and in the hearing of our God, I say, observe and apply yourselves to all the commandments of the Lord your God, in order that you may possess this good land and bequeath it to your children after you forever. And you, my son Solomon, know the God of your father and serve him with single mind and fervent heart. For the Lord searches all minds and discerns the design of every thought. If you seek him, he will be available to you. But if you forsake him, he will abandon you forever. See then, the Lord chose you to build a house as the sanctuary. Be strong and do it."
Hazak again, right? Be strong. In this case, it's not be strong and courageous. But Hazak vase. Be strong and do it. Be strong and do it, right? It's like Nike, right? He says, be strong and do it.
David gave his son Solomon the plan of the porch and its houses, its storerooms and its upper chambers and inner chambers, and of the place of the ark cover, and the plan of all that he had by the Spirit, of the courts of the house of the Lord and all its surrounding chambers, and of the treasuries of the house of God, and of the treasuries of the holy things. The divisions of priests and Levites for all the work of the service of the house of the Lord, and all the vessels of the service of the house of the Lord. And gold, the weight of gold for vessels of every sort of use, silver for all the vessels of silver by weight, for all the vessels of every kind of service, the weight of the gold lampstands and their gold lamps, and the weight of the silver lampstand, each lampstand and its silver lamps according to the use of every lampstand, and the weight of gold for the tables of the rows of bread, for each table, and of silver for the silver tables, and of the pure gold for the forks and the basins and the jars, and the weight of the gold bowls, every bowl, and the weight of the silver bowls, each and every bowl, the weight of refined gold for the incense altar, and the gold for the figure of the chariot, the cherubim, those with outspread wings screening the ark of the covenant of the Lord. All this, that the Lord may be understand by his hand on me, I give you in writing, the plan of all the works. David said to
Wait,
his...
1 second. No. We found virtually, we haven't found much from the first temple period. We have found some things from the first temple period, but we haven't found anything that we can definitively say was in that first temple. So that we haven't found, but we have found things from that period. So it's the problem is we don't have anything that we can say, well, this is one of the things that's described here. And yeah, keep that in mind. Here we go.
All this that the Lord made me understand by his hand on me, I give you in writing, the plan of all the works. David said to his son Solomon, be strong and of good courage, and do it. Do not be afraid or dismayed, for the Lord God, my God, is with you. He will not fail you or forsake you till all the work on the house of the Lord is done. Here are the divisions of the priests and Levites for all kinds of service of the house of God, and with you in all the work are willing men skilled in all sorts of tasks. Also the officers and all the people are at your command.
Now, yeah, I don't want to open this up. The last chapter is about another 20 verses. It is it's well, let's read it. Let's read a little because it really does go with this one. You can argue we can read it next week and we can read it as part of the second book of Chronicles, which again was not put there by the Jewish scholars. It was done by Christian scholars who felt that the good place to break this was where, like I said, the books of Samuel and Kings break, which is the death of David, which again, much of Chronicles we saw. It starts with Adam and Eve and then goes to, goes to that. No, let's not rush through it. Let's read 29 next week with chapter 1 of Chronicles 2, which is a good place for us also to go back and forth and to look at the difference between this. Because what's interesting is this book is going to end with, if you want to know, it is in the book of Samuel. so I will tell you, that's one of the reasons why we're going to look at it in a little bit. Because it ends with this words, the acts of King David, early and late, are recorded in the history of Samuel the seer, the history of Nathan the prophet, and the history of Gad the seer. what I didn't want to get into right now is something that John raised, which is I'd like to know more about Nathan. Well, my friends, there was a book called The History of Nathan the Prophet. There was also a book about the history of God, who was also a prophet that we read about, who's one of, and again, Natan is a Navi, God is a Jose. I don't want to split hairs on what the difference was, but they're both some types of people. Maybe a prophet speaks the words of God that come to him as words, whereas the seer sees things. The word Jose is literally for seer, is somebody who has visions. So maybe they have visions and they tell people what they saw in the vision. One hears God, one sees God, if you will, which is why it's a seer, right? Which is a good translation, right? It has seen in it. But yeah, we'll take a look at this. But yes, there is a assumption here that there are these other books. And if you want to look at these other books, you can do that. So it's not like they said, don't read these other books. The history of Samuel, we have. The history of Nathan, we don't. The history of God, we don't. We'd like to. We'd like to have those. And by the way, maybe some of them were quoted in the book of Samuel. We don't know that the book of the history of the Samuel the seer is the book of Samuel. I want to make that clear. Nowhere in the book of Samuel does it say, this is the book of Samuel. So the book of Samuel could also have the book of Nathan in it. We don't know. But look, we assume that the book of Samuel is the book that was just mentioned here, but it's probably maybe part of it, or maybe it's, again, maybe it's the edited version of it that we have. But it's not like the book of Chronicles says, don't go back and look at that. This is, if you want to read those books, there's those books too. So this book was seen as something that could be read in addition to that. What they didn't assume is that we would be able to put the text right up next to each other like we just did. Or like we're going to do. We didn't really do that today. But next week we will. Because I'm going to show you what is not in the book of Chronicles when it comes to the transition here that we're just reading. We are not in person next week. I'm back in San Diego next week, so I'm just going to tell you that. But we are going to, Tuesday and Wednesday next week, I will be online. Tomorrow night, yes. Well, that's what we just said. You weren't here when we said it? Oh, yeah, you were sleeping. So we did discuss it. I think we cannot have it. I don't think we can have class. I'm not one to say that, but I think if the Dodgers win, let's be in agreement on that. If the